This self is to be won by the truth and by an integral knowledge. Hear how thou shalt know me in my totality, for even of the seekers who have achieved, hardly one knows me in all the truth of my being. Hello, this is Shores of Infinity with your host Chris speaking. Today a video about Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine, chapter 15 of the second book, Reality and the Integral Knowledge. In the beginning I read two quotes, one from the Mundaka Upanishad and one from the Bhagavad Gita. We already summarized here the first 2/3 of the Life Divine, and recently I got some feedback of some followers and listeners of this channel that those videos were very helpful. So I'm continuing here, and I will endeavor to finish the last third of the Life Divine, which is the most difficult. The first 2/3 were more about the obstacles, the ignorance, the problems on the journey to knowledge, enlightenment, wisdom. Now the last third is actually what probably most of you are interested in what can there be found on the way to enlightenment. What is the goal? Is there a goal? Yeah? Because the more you progress on the path to enlightenment, the more you actually have the impression that there's nothing. Yeah? First there's a lot of knowledge available suddenly, and then all this gets relativized into a nothingness, and there seems to be nothing left. Which happens if you use the Hawkins scale in the 600s. Between 600 and 700, all falls away. It's like Socrates said, I know that I don't know anything. Until you arrive at 700, and then there seems to be nothing. Nothing is true, nothing is real. All is just illusion, all is just appearance. So what Sri Aurobindo and Meher Baba and some of these ancient Vedic and Upanishadic seers talk about is what is happening after Hawkins scale 700. 701 and plus. And almost no one got there. Almost no one is there, was there. So there is, of course, some suspicion. Is this all make-believe? Is this all wishful thinking? Is this all some drug haze, as U.G. Krishnamurti suggested? Yeah, were these Upanishadic and Vedic seers just high on some psilocybin or agaric fly mushroom or some other entheogenic drug? Who knows? So the question is, firstly, can we find something, and how do we know it? How can we verify it? Yeah? If you're not there beyond 700 on the Hawkins scale, or in the second tier of spell dynamics, or however you want to put it, then you cannot verify it. But in the business of enlightenment and spirituality, we are not very fond of believing it. There's no point in believing that there's something to be found. So there's a bit of a conundrum. That's also why I didn't continue the series up till now. But there is a lot of interest now. A lot of Indians also who listen to this channel and watch these videos. A lot of people from Auroville, which I'm very happy about, and which who I'm very grateful to. Former friends when I lived there, and who I lost contact with, and now I have some contact again. So is there an integral knowledge? That's the question of this chapter. Is there a reality? Is it all appearance, or is there some absolute reality that actually exists? And the answer of Sri Aurobindo is yes. There is something that is only appearance. That is an interplay between ignorance and limited knowledge that is accessible to all human beings, but that doesn't lead anywhere. And in some cases even leads to evil and cruelty and so on, as we have seen. And as we see everywhere in the world right now, all these wars that are going on, all these killings and extortions and so on. So that is very obvious that there is ignorance. Ignorance is the cause of what we call evil. But is there the opposite also? A real reality, a true self, a truth, an absolute, like it is described in the Upanishads and the Vedas, a Brahman, a Brahman that exists previous to all what we usually call reality. A substrate, kind of, an origin of everything that we call real or unreal or appearance. Something that is not changing in itself. It may change in the manifestations it calls forth, but it's not changeable in itself, which sounds a bit like the monotheistic God of the three monotheistic religions, but that's not what is meant. Or is it? Now, there's always also this question, is this Brahman similar to the God of the Christians and the Muslims? So, is there something beyond a phenomenon? Is there something beyond a temporal appearance? Something larger, more complex? And is it possible for us human beings to transcend our limitations, our ignorance, and to arrive there? To actually, is it possible for us to see this absolute, to experience it somehow, to know it? And the answer of Sri Aurobindo is, again, yes. And the link, the missing link, that is often called the true self, which is not a better form of the false self, of the ego, is what Sri Aurobindo calls the psychic being. And it's not an individual self, it's a collective self. It's something that all human beings can link into. It's basically like a spiritual internet where you can plug into and then you're connected. And this psychic being is also connected to the absolute. So this is our link here. It's not via the mind. It's not that we have to expand our mind capacities or our knowledge, but that we have to find a way to link into the psychic being, which is not individual but collective, or even beyond human collective, which is a divine spark, so to say. It belongs to the absolute, to Brahman, if you want to say it like that. And here we have this two quotes from the beginning. This self is to be won by the truth and by an integral knowledge. This self is the psychic being. And from the Gita, hear how thou shalt know me in my totality. For even of the seekers who have achieved, hardly one knows me in all the truth of my being. So even if you are already progressed on the spiritual path, in the 500s or 600s of the Hawkins scale, it's not necessary that you have a connection to the psychic being. But if you go beyond the 700 threshold, which is very, very tricky, and there are videos about that on this channel as well, beyond the 700 threshold is only possible with the psychic being, if you have a connection to the psychic being. And with and through this psychic being, it's possible to connect to this eternal knowledge that is not part of the ignorance. And mostly we are swimming around in relative ignorance, more or less ignorance, but it's still ignorance. And although even this ignorance must somehow be linked to the Absolute, because the Absolute is everything, so the ignorance must also be part of this everything. It cannot be separate from it. It cannot be its opposite. There is no devil, so to say. There is no God on the one side and devil on the other side. There's only one Absolute, and ignorance must be part of it. And just as there is a lot of ignorance in us, innately, there is a link to truth in us that we can find. You have to find this link that must be there in us. Yeah. All of creation must have this link to the absolute truth, if there is an absolute truth. So, this is quite a long chapter, reality and the integral knowledge. But what is very important is to see that Sri Aurobindo says here there is a reality, there is an absolute reality, and there is the possibility for us to connect to it, and to see it, and to experience it. And this he calls integral knowledge. It's not a knowledge by the mind. The mind is not all bad, of course. It has higher faculties, but still it's not enough. The mind is not enough. You need this psychic being to be able to pierce the many veils of Maya, the magic of Maya. Otherwise you're only caught in appearances, in ignorance. So there's always this movement in Sri Aurobindo between the higher and the lower. It's like a sewing machine. You go up and down. You go up, you zoom out, as Jeffrey Martin says, and view the world, the reality from above. And then you zoom in again, you go down and manifest this knowledge. You try it out in day-to-day life. There is no point in just sitting somewhere in an ivory tower. Yeah, you have to try out this knowledge if it really works, or if it's just some illusion. There's the big, big danger of spiritual bypassing and of imagining that you're super wise without trying it out. That's why Nietzsche's book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is so great. Yeah, that's exactly what it is about. Yeah, this guy, he was meditating and does all kinds of spiritual stuff in the mountains of Switzerland or Iran, and then he goes down and talks to people and tries out if it works, if it's true what he learned. And most of the time he finds out that it isn't. He has to go back to the mountains, gather more integral knowledge, and then try it out again. And the spiritual journey cannot be an escape. It is an inward motion, but not an inward escape like in trauma. If you're traumatized, you escape. Part of you suffers the trauma, and most of the internal parts escape. And this we should not do in spirituality. We have to always verify if it works in day-to-day life. That is very important. So, how to find this superconscience? There's an inconscience on the one hand and a superconscience on the other hand, and there is a possibility to transform into it, to transform our body, mind and spirit into perceiving this greater consciousness. And the link is consciousness itself. Now there are some people who say there is nothing. even consciousness is an illusion. And this may be true, and we can only find it out if we go beyond this threshold of 700 on the Hawkins scale, or into third tier spiral dynamics, which is super scary. So there's a bit of trust necessary. Not necessarily faith or belief, but trust that there is something beyond that. Or if not, then it doesn't matter if you die. Yeah? So there is the possibility of dying, and this has to be accepted. If you're afraid of death, you cannot go beyond Hawkins scale 700. So this has to be worked out beforehand. This is also why I recommend trauma therapy all the time. Initially, this can also become an addiction, and then you do it for years and decades and get stuck there. But initially, it's necessary to do trauma therapy to get rid of fear, shame, and guilt. This should not govern you anymore, otherwise no spiritual progress is necessary, or at least not the one we need to transform and to go beyond 700. Sri Aurobindo writes here, an integral knowledge demands an exploration, an unveiling of all the possible domains of consciousness and experience. Now, there are subjective domains and objective domains. Usually we are caught within the subjective domains. But this exploration is necessary, the unveiling of all the possible domains of consciousness and experience. And it's not only consciousness, but also experience. It's not just that you go inside and do all kinds of inward travel through all kinds of realms. The experience has to be linked to the physical also. The thing that usually holds us back to do this exploration is our belief in the fundamental validity of the objectivity of matter. Yeah, especially in our society, we grow up and we're educated to believe that matter is real. So you have to be open to the possibility that matter is also just a manifestation. It's also just an appearance. It's real in a way and not real in another way, because it's limited. We're looking for something that is unlimited. What we should do, Sri Aurobindo recommends, is a many-sided seeking. You're not seeking in one direction, but in all directions, a many-sided seeking. Otherwise, we cannot get out of this ignorance, which is a limitation. As we have seen in the previous chapters, ignorance is a limitation, a separation. As long as we are caught in this view of separation and duality and limitation, and we're caught in ignorance, and we cannot see the larger truth if there is one. What we have to do instead is being open to a change of our being. Again, this is tricky, yeah? Change of our being is tricky because this triggers, again, trauma responses, yeah? You're perfect as you are. At the same time, something in you can be transformed. It's not that you're wrong somehow or evil or whatever, and then you have to transform into something good and better. That's not what he means here. Because that is what religion talks about. This is not a religious book, although it sounds like it sometimes. Sri Aurobindo says we have a mold of consciousness. Not the fungus mold, but the container, a form. Your consciousness has a certain form by conditioning, individual and collective conditioning. So we grow up into this mold and we have to break this mold. This mold is limiting us. We have to go beyond the mold of our previous brainwashing, education, habits, and so on. Sri Aurobindo is an example of spiritual evolution. Again, there are a lot of spiritual teachers who say there is no such thing as evolution. That's just wishful thinking. But let's be open to that. What Sri Aurobindo and Meher Baba say, that there is a spiritual evolution linked to a cosmic evolution. We are part of this cosmic evolution and we are meant to evolve. So basically we have to go with the flow. We have to find this psychic being and then go with the flow and let us be drawn into this evolution, into these higher stages of consciousness, which are not better. Higher consciousness doesn't mean it's better. That's again one misunderstanding. We're not in religion here. We're not in sin and atonement and stuff. Higher consciousness just means that you have the bird's eye view. Yeah? The zooming out again. Yeah? If you're an astronaut in outer space or in a station that is cruising, circling around Earth, then you have a higher vantage point. You have the bird's eye view. You can see better. That's more or less what is meant. But you're not a better human being because of that. Unfortunately, we have to assume that there is some kind of absolute origin and support. It says here, first we affirm an absolute as the origin and support and secret reality of all things. The absolute reality is indefinable and ineffable by mental thought and mental language. It is self-existent and self-evident to itself. Okay, as we have no connection to this normally, unless you have a peak experience, all we can do is to be open to it. To believe in it only because Sri Aurobindo said it is also not helpful, because then it becomes a religion and that's a different path. But we have to be open to it and assume that it exists, and then we may be able to verify it. That's the leap kind of that we have to take. And yeah, it's not a leap of faith because it's not a leap of religion. Sri Aurobindo always was very particular to avoid creating a religion. Didn't want a religion because religion makes followers who stop thinking for themselves and stop verifying and experiencing for themselves. That's not what he wanted. He wanted people to be open to everything and try out everything, to experience everything. And our link, to recapitulate, is the psychic being. And to get to the psychic being, we have to practice our intuition. Not our gut feeling, our instincts, but intuition. And the more often you follow your intuition, the clearer its voice becomes. And the intuition will lead you to the psychic being. The psychic being will, according to Sri Aurobindo, lead you to truth, to the integral knowledge, to the reality, to the absolute, to a bird's eye view. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and joining me on Patreon. And thank you especially to all those who have already joined me on Patreon. See you soon.